The theater lights dimmed, and the crowd's chatter began to fade into an ocean of anticipation. The massive stage shimmered under a halo of golden light, the kind used to make dreams look larger than life. It was the semifinal night of America's Voice, one of the biggest televised talent shows in the country. The air was electric, thousands of people filled the auditorium, and millions more watched from their homes. The host, a tall man with the perfect TV smile, stepped forward and said into his mic, "Next up, we have a young contestant, just 14 years old, from a small town in Oklahoma. Please welcome, Ethan Miller." The audience clapped politely. No one knew the name, just another kid chasing a dream. But behind the curtains, a boy stood frozen, clutching a guitar that looked too big for his small shoulders. The edges of the instrument were cracked and held together with tape, its surface dull and scratched from years of use. Ethan took one deep breath. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it echoing in his ears. His hands trembled slightly as he whispered to himself, "You can do this, Dad said music heals." Then he walked out. The lights hit him instantly, blinding, white, and hot. For a moment, he had to squint. The hall stretched endlessly before him, a sea of faces lost in the shadows. The judges' table glowed beneath him like a beacon. One of the judges, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, leaned forward and smiled gently. "Hey there, young man. What's your name?" Ethan. Ethan Miller." "And how old are you, Ethan?" 14, sir." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. 14. So small, so young. Another judge, a woman with golden curls and a gentle voice, asked, "What will you be performing for us tonight, sweetheart?" Ethan looked down at his old guitar, brushing his fingers lightly across the strings. "I'll be singing Hotel California." The audience gave a little surprised applause. A classic, a song not many young people even knew anymore. The female judge smiled. "That's a big song choice. Any reason you chose that one?" Ethan hesitated. His throat tightened. It was my dad's favorite song." The host tilted his head slightly, curiosity and concern blending in his expression. "Is your dad here tonight?" Ethan shook his head. "No, sir. He passed away last year." The hall fell silent. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. "I'm sorry to hear that," said the older judge softly. "Take your time, son." Ethan nodded, blinking quickly to hold back tears. "He used to play this song for me every night before bed. He said that one day, I'd play it for him when he couldn't anymore. So, I guess tonight, I'm keeping that promise." That single sentence melted every heart in the room. Even the toughest-looking security guard near the exit looked down, swallowing hard. Ethan adjusted the microphone. "I don't need a backing track," he said quietly. "I'll play it myself." The sound crew looked at each other, surprised, but nodded. The judges leaned forward. Ethan sat down on the stool in the center of the stage, his guitar resting against his knee. The lights softened around him, fading into a single warm beam that framed him like a memory. He took a deep breath, and began to play. The first chord was soft and a little shaky, but real. It wasn't polished, wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And in that moment, the entire hall seemed to lean closer, drawn by something deeper than technique, the rawness of truth. Musical notes. On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair, musical notes. His voice was gentle, fragile, almost, but filled with something you couldn't fake. Every word carried emotion, every note carried pain. It wasn't just a boy singing a song, it was a son talking to his father through music. The camera zoomed in on his face, his eyes closed, his lips trembling, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. The judges watched silently, their expressions softening. When he reached the chorus, his voice cracked slightly. The audience collectively exhaled, not because he made a mistake, but because they felt it. That small crack carried more power than any perfect note ever could. Musical notes. Welcome to the Hotel California, musical notes. The hall grew quieter with every word. The female judge covered her mouth, her eyes glistening. The producer judge, known for his bluntness, leaned back in his chair, stunned. As Ethan reached the bridge, something inside him shifted. His voice grew stronger, not louder, but braver. His fingers moved across the strings with confidence that didn't belong to a nervous 14-year-old, it belonged to someone who had loved, lost, and learned to rise again. Musical notes. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. Musical notes. The final note hung in the air, soft, haunting, echoing through every heart in the room. And then, Silence. No one clapped. No one moved. For a few endless seconds, the hall was still, not because they didn't like it, but because they were too overwhelmed to react. The music had reached a part of them they didn't know was waiting to be touched. Then, a single person in the back stood up. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire crowd was on their feet, applauding, cheering, crying. The sound rolled through the theater like thunder. Ethan looked around, his eyes wide. He wasn't sure what to do. He'd never seen so many people cry before. The golden-haired judge leaned into her microphone. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Ethan, that was one of the most beautiful performances I've ever heard. You didn't just sing that song, you felt it, and you made all of us feel it too. The music producer judge, known for his hard exterior, wiped his eyes and said softly, "You reminded me why I fell in love with music." "Thank you, kid." The host stepped forward, speaking gently. "Ethan, do you know what just happened here?" Ethan shook his head, smiling shyly. "I don't know, I just wanted to sing for my dad." The host smiled warmly. "You did more than that, son. You made an entire world remember the people they've loved and lost. That's something only real artists can do." Ethan's lip trembled. He looked up toward the ceiling, as if trying to find a star through the bright lights. "Dad," he whispered under his breath, "I did it." The crowd, still standing, clapped louder. Tears ran down faces everywhere, parents, children, even the judges. And somewhere, beyond that stage, in a place beyond pain and time, maybe, just maybe, someone was smiling down at him, proud. The spotlight faded, the applause echoed, and in that moment, the world didn't just see a boy. They saw hope. Long before the bright lights, the applause, and the cameras, Ethan Miller's world had been small. Just a little house on the edge of a dusty Oklahoma town, surrounded by fields that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. It was a quiet place, the kind where the sound of the wind through the wheat was louder than traffic, and where dreams seemed like stars, beautiful, but always far away. Ethan lived there with his father, Daniel Miller, a kind man with rough hands and a tired smile. Daniel worked at a local garage during the day, fixing engines and wiping grease from his arms, but when night came, he became something else, a musician, a dreamer. He didn't have much, but what he did have was music. Every evening, after dinner, Daniel would pull out his old guitar, the same one Ethan would one day take to the stage, and sing softly while Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, listening like the world depended on it. Music, his dad used to say, is how the soul speaks when words can't. You don't need money or fame for it, just heart. Those were the nights Ethan loved most. His father's voice wasn't perfect, but it had warmth, a voice that made sadness sound beautiful. And no matter how tired Daniel was, he always played Ethan's favorite song, Hotel California. He'd grin and say, "This one's magic, kid. Listen close, you'll hear stories inside the notes." Ethan never forgot those words. But life has a way of changing without warning. It started one cold morning, the kind where the air smells like rain. Ethan woke up to the sound of coughing. His father was in the kitchen, sitting at the table, holding a mug of coffee that trembled in his hands. His face looked pale, and his breath came in short gasps. "Dad, you okay?" "Yeah, bud," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "Just a little tired." But as the weeks passed, the coughing got worse. The laughter faded. Some days, Daniel couldn't even pick up the guitar. Ethan would come home from school and find his father staring out the window, lost in thought. The bills on the counter grew higher, the medicine bottles multiplied, and the house began to feel emptier. One night, Ethan walked into his father's room and saw him sitting on the edge of the bed, his guitar in his lap. The strings were still, but his eyes were filled with tears. "Dad," Ethan whispered. Daniel looked up and managed a weak smile. "Hey, champ, I was just thinking." "About what?" He paused, then said quietly, "About how short life really is. About how fast it all goes. I wanted to give you the world, son, but I guess I'll just give you a song instead." He handed Ethan the guitar. "This one's yours now," he said. "Promise me you'll keep playing, even when it hurts. Music is stronger than pain, stronger than loss. It'll carry you through." Ethan didn't understand it then. He just hugged his father tightly. But 3 months later, Daniel Miller was gone. The funeral was small, a few neighbors, some old friends, and Ethan's mother, who had divorced Daniel years ago but still came to say goodbye. Ethan didn't cry during the service. He just stood silently, his small hands gripping the guitar case his father left behind. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, Ethan took the guitar into the living room. The house felt hollow without his father's voice. He sat on the floor, stared at the strings, and whispered, "I don't know if I can do this without you." But then he remembered his father's words. Music is stronger than pain. So he played. The chords were rough, his fingers stumbled, and the notes wobbled, but he played anyway. It was the first time he'd ever played alone, and it felt like his dad was sitting right beside him. For months, that was all he did. After school, he'd rush home, finish his homework, and play. His calluses thickened, his fingers bled sometimes, but he didn't stop. He practiced until the music sounded like breathing. He started performing small gigs, at school assemblies, church gatherings, and local cafes. People would smile politely, toss a few dollars in his open guitar case, and move on. But one night, something changed. A woman in her 50s approached him after his set at a diner. She had tears in her eyes. "Young man," she said softly, "that song, Hotel California, my husband used to play it for me before he passed. You made me feel like he was still here." That moment stayed with Ethan. It was the first time he realized, maybe his father had been right. Maybe music really could heal. Years passed, and the dream that once felt far away started to grow inside him. When America's Voice announced auditions in his state, Ethan almost didn't go. He didn't have fancy clothes, he didn't have a new guitar, and he didn't think anyone would care about a small-town kid with a sad song. But his mom, now working double shifts at a diner, squeezed his shoulder one evening and said, "Your dad believed in you, Ethan. I think it's time you believe in yourself too." So he went. He took a bus for 4 hours to reach the city, carrying only a backpack, a small lunch, and his father's guitar. The instrument was heavier than before, not just in weight, but in meaning. Every scratch told a story, every dent a memory. At the audition, hundreds of contestants waited in line, confident, flashy, loud. Ethan stood quietly among them, his heart pounding, his old guitar case looking out of place among the shiny ones. When his turn came, the judges barely looked up at first. But when he started to sing, the room shifted. Conversations stopped. Producers peeked in from behind the curtains. His voice, raw and trembling, filled the space with something that felt almost sacred. They didn't even let him finish the song. One of the judges raised a hand and said, "You're going to Hollywood." Ethan couldn't speak. He just nodded, clutching the strap of his guitar as tears blurred his vision. That night, he called his mom from a payphone. "Mom, I did it," he said softly. She laughed through tears. "I knew you would, sweetheart. Your dad's probably bragging in heaven right now." He smiled, looking up at the stars, the same way he would on that stage months later. "Yeah," he whispered, "I think he is." And that's how the journey began, not with fame, not with luck, but with love. A father's promise, a son's devotion, a broken guitar and a song that never really ended. So when Ethan finally stood under the bright lights of America's Voice, trembling with nerves, what the world saw as just another contestant, was really a boy who had carried his father's heart all the way to that moment. Every note he played that night came from those long, lonely years. Every word he sang carried his father's memory. And when the audience cried, they weren't just crying for the song. They were crying for every person they had ever lost. Because sometimes, a single voice can remind the world that love doesn't die, it just changes form and keeps singing. The next morning, the world woke up to his voice. Clips of Ethan's performance flooded social media overnight, shared by fans, celebrities, and even news anchors who usually never cried on camera. The video was titled, "Everyone Cried as This Boy Sang, Hotel California," with pure emotion loudly crying Mike. Within hours, it had millions of views. Comments poured in from around the globe, from mothers who had lost their sons, from fathers who saw themselves in Daniel, from people who hadn't listened to music in years but suddenly felt something awaken inside them. One comment read, "Greater than, this boy didn't just sing. He healed hearts." Another said, "Greater than, I lost my dad 2 years ago. I couldn't even listen to this song without breaking down. But today, I smiled through tears. Thank you, Ethan." Back in Oklahoma, Ethan sat in his small living room, his mother beside him, watching the performance replay on TV. She held his hand tightly, tears glistening in her eyes. "You did it, baby," she whispered. "You really did it." Ethan didn't say much. He just smiled shyly, the same quiet, humble smile he'd worn on stage. "I think Dad helped," he said softly. That week, the producers of America's Voice called again. They wanted him back, not just for the finals, but for a special segment, the story behind the song. They flew him and his mom to Los Angeles, their first time on a plane. As they looked out the window at the clouds, Ethan whispered, "It's like flying through music." His mom laughed through her tears. "Your dad would have loved that." When they arrived at the studio, things felt surreal. Everyone recognized him, the camera crew, the security guards, even the janitors. People stopped him in hallways, saying, "Hey, you're that kid who made the world cry." Ethan just nodded, grateful but overwhelmed. All he ever wanted was to sing for his dad. The final night of America's Voice came quickly. The stage was grander now, larger lights, bigger screens, and thousands more in the audience. But when Ethan stepped onto that familiar spot under the spotlight, the same old calm washed over him. He closed his eyes and whispered under his breath, "Dad, this one's for you." This time, he didn't sing Hotel California. He sang something different. It was an original song, one he'd written himself, quietly, in his room during sleepless nights. He called it, "The Song You Left Behind." The first verse spoke of his father's laughter echoing through empty halls, of promises made over broken strings, of how music had become the only way he could still say, "I love you." As he sang, the cameras zoomed in, capturing every tear, every breath, every tremor in his voice. The lyrics were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime. Musical notes: "You taught me chords before goodbye. Said love will never fade or die. Now every note I play, it seems. You're still right here between the dreams." Musical notes. The audience was silent. You could have heard a heartbeat in that vast hall. When he finished, there was no hesitation this time. The crowd erupted, louder than ever before. People stood, clapping, shouting, crying. The female judge pressed the golden buzzer, showering the stage with gold confetti that floated around Ethan like falling stars. He looked up through the glitter, tears streaming down his cheeks, and for a second, he swore he saw his father standing in the front row, smiling, guitar in hand. It was over, but it was also the beginning. After the show ended, Ethan didn't vanish like many contestants do. His story was too powerful. Every talk show wanted him, every magazine wanted his picture. But fame wasn't what he cared about what the song had done to people. Hospitals began writing to him, asking if he could visit children's wards to perform. "Your voice gives them hope," one nurse wrote. So he went. No cameras, no press, just Ethan and his guitar. He played for kids fighting cancer, for veterans learning to walk again, for lonely elders in nursing homes who hadn't heard a live song in years. He'd smile and say, "This song helped me heal. Maybe it'll help you too." Each time he sang, he noticed something: people didn't just listen, they remembered. Memories of love, loss, family. Music had become a bridge between pain and peace. One quiet evening, months later, Ethan received a small brown envelope in the mail. There was no return address, just his name, written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a letter, greater than, "Dear Ethan, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted to say thank you. My husband passed away 5 years ago, and I thought I'd never feel joy again. Then I saw your performance. You made me remember the good days, not the sadness, but the love. You helped me start living again. Never stop singing, son. You're doing God's work." A mother who found her smile again. Ethan held the letter for a long time, tears falling silently onto the paper. He placed it inside his father's old guitar case, right beside a small photograph, the one of him and his dad playing together in their living room. It had been a year since that performance, the night that changed everything. Ethan was now performing across the country, but he never forgot where it all began. On the anniversary of his father's death, he returned to his old house in Oklahoma. The walls were the same, the creaking floorboards familiar. The air smelled like memories. He carried his guitar outside, to the open field where he and his dad used to sit and watch the stars. He placed the guitar on his lap and began to play Hotel California, soft, gentle, almost like a whisper to heaven. The wind brushed through his hair, carrying the melody away into the night. When the song ended, he looked up at the sky and smiled. "Hey, Dad," he said quietly. "Looks like the song really did heal people." And for the first time, Ethan didn't feel alone. He felt surrounded by his father's love, by the world's kindness, by the power of music that never dies. The boy who once played in a small room was now the voice of millions. But to him, he was still just a son singing to his dad. Ethan's story wasn't just about talent, it was about truth. He reminded the world that pain can create beauty, that love doesn't end when someone is gone, and that even the smallest voice can echo across the world if it comes from the heart. And somewhere, beyond the applause and the fame, a father's promise still lingered, in every song, every tear, every note. Because real music doesn't just live in sound. It lives in souls. Musical notes, music doesn't end, Ethan once said in an interview. It just keeps finding new hearts to play in. And he was right, because from that night onward, the world didn't just remember his performance. They felt it.